PM announced that Australia is set to expel its Iranian ambassador, with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese accusing the Iranian government of orchestrating anti-Semitic attacks against the Australian Jewish community. Australia's spy agency ASIO claims Iran directed at least 2 but likely more attacks in Australia. As well as expelling the Iranian ambassador to Australia, the Australian embassy in Iran has suspended its operations, and the head of ASIO saying that for the past 10 months anti-Semitic attacks has been one of ASIO's priorities and investigations are ongoing. So a major announcement. I've already laid out the bare bones of it, but can you run through the details for us?
Yeah, that's right, Ros. This is a very consequential decision that the government has made, and it's worth just pausing for a moment to feel the historical weight of it. This is not a step that the government has taken lightly, and in fact it's worth pointing out this is the first time in post-war history that Australia has actually taken the step of expelling an ambassador for a sovereign nation in Canberra. Now, we have seen diplomatic expulsions before. That's not new. We, for example, saw multiple expulsions of Russian diplomats by the Turnbull administration, for example. We saw back in 2012 a Syrian charge d'affaires expelled. So we have seen senior diplomats booted from this country before, but the step that has been taken by the government to not just get the ambassador out of the country, but essentially to order the expulsion of 3 other Iranian diplomats. On the face of it, pretty much the entirety of Iran's diplomatic presence here in Canberra speaks to the seriousness of what the government says has occurred here and the level of anger that's felt within the Australian government and, you'd assume, within the Australian community about what has occurred. Now, it's worth pointing out the government is not alleging here that the Iranian ambassador or the Iranian diplomats expelled were themselves personally behind these 2 attacks. What the ASIO boss Mike Burgess has said is that Iran's Revolutionary Guard has essentially directed this through a series of cutouts, as he describes it, to actually pay other people in Australia to conduct these attacks in both Sydney and Melbourne with the aim of disturbing social cohesion in Australia and causing intense distress to the Jewish community here in Australia. So it's a big decision from the government. It's one that will have serious consequences, not just for Australia, but also for Australia's diplomatic relations throughout the region and potentially globally as well. But it's a step that the government feels clearly it had to take, given the weight of what it says Iran has orchestrated here, the brazenness of it, the deliberate attempt to create fear and panic here in Australia, and the fact that it has caused, obviously, an immense amount of fear and anxiety throughout the Australian community.
And what are your thoughts then, Stephen, about the implications of this announcement and the diplomatic moves by the Australian government?
Well, typically whenever an ambassador is kicked out, there's a tit for tat. So you would assume that Iran would do the same were it not for the fact that Australia has already essentially ordered its diplomatic staff out of the country. You might remember this actually predates this most recent episode, because the government made the assessment that it was already too dangerous for most Australian-based diplomats in Tehran to stay, given the hostilities with Israel. So this is a few months ago now. It actually ordered Australian diplomats out of Tehran to Azerbaijan and elsewhere. But what's now happened is that the government now it's decided to make this decision. It's basically pulled any remaining staff out of Iran. Not only that, it's now, as we heard, advising Australians who are in Iran essentially to leave, saying that they are now at heightened risk of arbitrary detention. And essentially, we know that Iran has been guilty in the past many times of essentially using hostage diplomacy, taking Australians or other Westerners hostage, holding them on trumped-up charges and then using them as diplomatic leverage against that country. Clearly, the government doesn't want that to happen. That's why it's essentially cleared the Australian embassy in Tehran to avoid that diplomatic tit-for-tat. But also, it's now telling Australians very clearly in Iran, you are at risk and you should really think about going.
OK. Stephen, thank you.